Hey guys, welcome back to the 706 podcast. I'm your host for this week, Tony, here with a very special episode 75 on the film Cloud Atlas, personal favorite of mine. I will have my co-hosts introduce themselves in alphabetical order.
Anthony.
A, B, C, D. Okay. Connor.
My name's Kirk with a C, so actually I was meant to go second.
Sorry.
I knew Kirk would mess this up. I knew
Ciurck with an umlaut
Nice.
over the.
I was about to say C-I-R-K.
It's actually I'm Uzbek.
Cool.
I'm an Uzbek.
And I'm Tony with the silent K, so I'm just after Kirk with the C. So, all right, guys, I'll explain the premise here, why we're doing this episode at this particular time. So in episode 50, if you consult your book, your notes, we had a gimmick where for episode 75, we'd pick a movie as a second chance, meaning a movie that had been pitched and rejected in the past. So the three of us who were pitching movies that particular week pitched movies that someone else or that we had pitched in the past, but had been passed over. So I pitched Cloud Atlas, which Anthony had pitched to me in another time, and I turned down for whatever reason. So we decided back in episode 50, we're going to do this. Do we remember the alternative choices? I don't think we do.
It was I Origin.
Origins.
Excuse me.
Heat 2.
Forget what mine
Home Alone
was.
4.
Yeah, the new Home Alone on Disney Plus was a contender, even though it hadn't been announced yet, but we just had a feeling that was coming. But yes, so Cloud Atlas is a film by the Wachowski sisters and Tom Tykwer from 2012. It is kind of a science fiction film, I guess would be its genre. It's based on the novel by David Mitchell, the same name. And basically this movie it's sort of an anthology, but an anthology where the 5 or 6 stories play kind of in parallel, intercut between one another. So you have, very briefly, there's the story set in 1849, there's a story in 1936, 1973, 2012, 2144, and 2321. I am reading off Wikipedia. I am not going to do a synopsis of each story, even in brief, because that would just take us way too long. But basically, these stories all concern characters who are given an opportunity to transcend kind of the hierarchies and social conventions in their day, to kind of create a better future, create a better world. And the characters have moments of doubt, moments of failure, but ultimately triumph. And it's a movie about echoes through time and all these sorts of heady things that we will get into, I'm sure. I've seen this a couple times now, but this time I will start with, this is really, really tough, actually, who to start with. I am going to start with Anthony, since he both pitched it initially, and he's the one who I know has seen it before. So let's start with Anthony.
Sure. So I don't remember what I said when I tried to sell it to, I think Tony was the host when he overlooked it or passed it through. I don't remember what I said and I'm trying to sell it, but I think I should say along the lines of, was when I first watched this movie, I was not necessarily disappointed, but sort of underwhelmed by the kind of movie. Sure, it was ambitious, or it was kind of different. Sure, it was kind of interesting, all kind of things in its favor, but nothing that really sold me on the kind of vision as successful. But when I finally came around to pitching it in the last year, something had sort of changed. I don't know if it was just tiredness of kind of contemporary stuff coming out, tiredness from other media, or just kind of a willingness to re-examine it. But in seeing it again before I pitched it and seeing it again now for this kind of episode, I think overall I'm kind of on the side of your mileage with this kind of movie, no matter who you are, is going to vary. And it's going to vary depending on how you feel about certain storylines. And I think the right way to recommend this movie for anyone would be to find the storyline that really seems to resonate with you, because that's really kind of how I kind of approached it this time, at least. It's a method that works for me. Maybe it won't work for everyone. But for me, the one that seemed to work was the one with Ben Whishaw's character, who is an amanuensis for a kind of famous composer who is kind of past his heyday, needs help in kind of setting down new music. Everything about that storyline really seemed to resonate with me from its kind of start as kind of a Ben Whishaw's gay, withdrawn man into someone who kind of seeks ambition for his own, who wants to kind of create music in the shadow of a genius, wants to overtake and learn from that genius. Something about that seemed really fascinating to me. Whereas the Ian Holm one, for instance, who is the writer who kind of gains a cult following after a sort of gangster knocks off a critic off a building. That one, after that scene, kind of falters at places. I don't really find it humorous at times. I don't really like the way it kind of connects in all places. Anyway, my point is that this is such an unwieldy movie. I almost feel like you got to just pick moments to kind of handle for yourself. And at the end of the day, one other thing to kind of think about is this is a movie that the Wachowski siblings or sisters get all the credit for good and bad. But we also have to remember that there's another director involved. Is it Tom Tykwer? Tykwer? Okay. I don't know. I don't know enough about this movie to know which scenes are shot by who. At sometimes I could feel like I could guess. Sometimes I feel like I know. But there's something to be said for that kind of third voice having to be there. Maybe it's just for production issues, maybe it's just for budget issues. But the kind of infiltration of an outsider into their kind of sibling dynamic as filmmakers, I think lends the movie itself a kind of interesting dynamic that I think kind of comes through and at times works for the movie's favor, at times probably doesn't. And I know I'm saying a lot of things back and forth, but I think it's just the nature of the movie. Well, at the end of the day, I think this is a really good movie. But as I said, it's almost so hard to pinpoint something down. I would recommend it, but I'd recommend it with a reservation almost. Of don't be afraid to pull a Kirk and break it into multiple parts, to watch it in kind of, at your own pace, at your own leisure. But I'm glad I recommended it. I'm glad we're doing it for this episode. So
good. Yeah, I was trying to find it as you were talking. But yeah, in the credits, it actually says, I think they just did 3 and 3. So I don't think they worked together really. It was basically the Wachowskis did 3 of them and Tykwer did the other 3. I wish I remembered what those were. I was trying to Google it today. There's no Wikipedia doesn't say or whatever, but anyway, we'll fill it in later. So I think next we'll go with Connor. So I will say Connor's the one I'm the most apprehensive about this time. But let's hear what Connor has to say about Cloud Atlas.
Well, thanks for asking, Tony. This movie is great. Great at being bad. And I mean that seriously. This movie, its greatest accomplishment is to tell these 6 stories, right, that are completely independent and have nothing to do with each other and are of different genres, and to try to make them all cohere into one movie. And you don't get really amazingly annoyed at flipping between these different stories. And I think they succeed. The 3 of them succeed in making these stories somehow, just in terms of editing, in terms of, kind of slight, but not direct thematic parallels, even just kind of moments of just sort of using the medium of film where, what's the idea of the kind of the replacement shot of the idea of you see something happen or carrying momentum forward from one scene to a next or from a shot to another shot. It uses just the basic techniques of film to create these nice transitions between all of these stories as they flip back and forth, and creating little connections that seem to link, these spaces that would be kind of complete hard cuts and rough transitions, had they not been, thoughtfully executed. So I really admire it for that. I liked all the stories. My least favorite was the Ben Whishaw one. But what I feel like I can't say about it is that these separate bits amount to a larger whole. Basically, I think this is Tales of the Wachowskis, let's present you, 6 stories or whatever. And we have to basically, we get to enjoy these stories, but they don't really connect in any larger way. I think, yes, you've pointed out the common themes, but these are themes that are basically endemic to almost every story ever written. So it's kind of and they're simple stories to tell in a certain amount of time. So I don't think that it's thematically doesn't necessarily cohere for me, but it was important that it had that thematic sort of core such that they could all be fit together. But the main point is to be able to flip through the book and to read these chapters, these different stories, one by one and intermix them, which I think that variety is appealing and is pretty cool. But I have to say every single story, ends with kind of a cliche sort of appeal to, non-conventionality, or of, being brave in the face of oppression. And always we have like a very like kind of cut and dry villain in each one. And it just got a little bit, it was conventional, right, in its storytelling in that respect. Whereas I wish one of them might have been a bit more contemplative. I mean, sure, they varied in tone. Obviously, one was completely comic. One was kind of a modern screwball comedy. The Ian Holm one, another one was completely tragic, right? Ends in a suicide of a young gay man. Obviously it's, very tragic in its scope and very real. But at the same time, I thought it didn't just quite, execute on all of those levels. I thought they all felt a little bit flat. And though it's cool that they executed that, I don't really buy for a second into the whole larger idea of like our actions affect the world kind of thing. Like I don't really see it and how the stories truly are connected, right? But anyway, that's my opening bit. So I'm very impressed by the movie and its accomplishments. I think it is a great formal accomplishment in the canon of like anthology films, but I don't see it as much more than that.
Well, now I know how Frobisher felt when Varys, whatever his name, spit all over his symphony.
Vivian Ware or whatever. Yeah.
Vivian Ware. Yeah, it was that's the opposite of what happened. All right, Kirk. Connor, full of backhanded compliments and front-handed slaps. What will Kirk do? Always a question. Let's see where he takes us.
Well, I was thinking a lot about, recycling and waste disposal while I was watching this film. And I think I know why. It's because this film belongs in the dumpster. This film belongs in the dumpster behind some rundown movie theater in middle America. Can't sell 2 tickets for the matinee because this is an abomination of a film. And I don't say that lightly. No, let me let me back.
Don't back off now, Kirk. You have to commit.
So here's the thing. This film, Anthony, I think you're very correct. This film can play differently, will play differently. Every single person, anybody who watches it will have a different reaction. And often it's whether or not you connect to it on a visceral level, because it is 2 hours and 52 minutes. So it's like, how long can I marvel at their proficiency in editing before I get kind of bored? So it's like, is there a significant payoff? Is there emotional investment? And for me, it wasn't there. Might have been the day. Could be tomorrow. I feel differently. But today it did not feel that way. So I'll examine the film on a more technical, methodical scale. And, I'm looking at stuff that just jumps out to me. The first thing that jumps out to me, and it's not the most important thing, but it is important. This film has the single worst makeup of any film I've ever seen in my entire life. Hands down. Hands down. If Ronald McDonald made a movie on ketamine, the makeup would be far better. I mean, what the fuck? This was embarrassing. It was so bad. It was so bad. We had white people trying to be Asians. We had an Asian woman trying to be white. We had black people in white skin. And I mean, it was not ignoring the racial tension or whatever, faux pas. We look at these people they're so like, they're just draped in this extra fleshy, I don't even know what it's, viscera that is trying to make them look older. And it's horrible. It's so horrible. It's so poorly done. And it did make me mad. And so the film does not have that going for it. Second of all, Anthony said, what really drew him in is you pick a story and you really cling to it, one that speaks to you. Well, then you have to wade through 5 other fucking stories. You have to wade through Red with Morgan Freeman. You have to wade through Green Book or Blade Runner or Call Me by Your Name or whatever the fuck other movies there are. And After Earth with Will Smith. I mean, it's ridiculous. Just as one plot is getting momentum, they cut away to some bullshit, some random arbitrary bullshit. And it really, it felt like a slap in the face. It's like, no, we know better. We're very smart. And so then I'm like, okay, I can suffer all of this nonsense this absolute pretentiousness if there is a big payoff at the end. And the payoff could be honestly written on the back of a Bath and Body Works soap dispenser. The idea that we're all human and we're all connected and our actions go from into the future and reverberate through the future, and our kindness and our crimes. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? If I had written out a short paragraph of what I thought this film, like main themes of the film would have been, it would have aligned like 95%. There was no revelation at the end. There was absolutely no twist. There was no payoff. There was no emotional catharsis for me. My goodness. So I'm just, I'm trying to temper my mood here because I'm very kind of worked up. And of course, it's not all bad. I mean, the fact that they even thought to do a film like this should be commended. It didn't go well for me, didn't fly well for me, and I just feel like I'm kind of missing some things here, but all of the stories just seem so generic. Like Connor said, like, oh, now I've decided because a slave saved my life, I will go and be an abolitionist. And it's like, okay, yeah, all right. Is this a third grade period piece, or what are we doing here? And I don't know, guys. I don't know. I guess my biggest complaint is that none of this led, like Connor said, the pieces did not form a greater whole, a grander, more illustrious whole. It was just a collection of scraps. And, I left the movie feeling rather irked because there wasn't that payoff that I was hoping for. And maybe for some people it is like you've got Tom Hanks, the Valley Man, Zachary looking up at the sky and he sees Earth, and it's like, oh yeah, all of the movie that happened on that little blue dot. And it's like, I could get better emotional catharsis from, I don't know, Squid Game episode. It's just, so yeah, the new age backwash doesn't really fly well with me. And I know what you guys might say is like, I Origins, very similar in tone. Correct. But I Origins was more concentrated. I Origins was about a romance. It wasn't about 6 different fucking instances that are disparately connected. So I will defend I Origins and demarcate it in this instance because, anyways, Tony, you have some of the best taste in movies of anyone I know. We all have flops. And this may only prove the ultimate subjectivity of this futile exercise, but this was not for me. And maybe because it aspired to be the things that I like and it failed is why, maybe that's the reason why I dislike it so vehemently. So just a lot more thoughts as well. But sorry if I at any point became disrespectful there. I came off the top rope, landed my super smash, and I'll pass it back to Tony.
Well, Kirk, I have to say, the scene where Tom Hanks puts his headphones on Halle Berry and plays Barry Manilow brought a tear to my eye. And the fact that you disrespect this film so is unacceptable. I will say real
that's
quick,
a shot at I Origins for the audience. It's all right. It's fair. I can take it. It's there's subjectivity, right? It's true.
I just said, Kirk, you're the way you went was very funny to me because you started off saying, look, I'm going to calm down. I'm just going to give a methodical review of the technical elements of the film. And then you immediately start saying it was fucking bullshit. I hated it, like with no transition at all.
No, I talked about the makeup first.
Yeah, but you talked about how much you hated it and it made you mad.
Well, okay. I think objectively the makeup in this movie isn't the role, like it almost got to a point where I thought it was like a creative decision to have poor makeup. So I'm just curious if anyone else shared that perspective.
Okay, well we'll get to the makeup in a bit. Not to go on a big digression, but
I have a lot of thoughts. Yeah,
certainly worth discussing the makeup. And the particular thing you mentioned, which I was impressed it took that long to come up, is that there is, shall we say, yellow face in this film, and that there are white actors made up to resemble Asian people in this movie, which is like kind of wild. This is a movie from 2012, and we can talk about that and like why it's what its justification is and whether it's merited or whatever, that's its own discussion. But just to get into the film generally, I mean, you guys, interesting responses. I kind of thought watching it again that this could have been another like complete flop with you guys, because there's plenty of things in this movie that will rub people the wrong way, including what we just mentioned. But there's other things, certainly that's not a huge thing in the movie. But I think that Anthony's essentially right that of these 6 stories, the idea that they're all going to work like gangbusters for everyone is, of course, not true. I mean, there's going to be ones like, for instance, the present day one. I agree with Anthony on the present day one with Tom Hanks as the Aussie bad boy writer and his publisher who goes into hiding at this nursing home. It's kind of the comic relief, and I think the way they constructed this movie was that in a film, right, a conventional narrative film, you're going to try to go for, you're going to have romantic moments, you're going to have tragic moments, you're going to have exciting, thrilling moments, whatever. This movie tried to edit it together so that you get all those flavors in the order you would in a conventionally structured film. They just happen to be distinct storylines, which I think is a narratively kind of a bold idea. And I don't think anyone will fault this movie for a lack of boldness. Yeah, but all 6 of those stories are not going to work for everybody. And you are going to end up in a situation, inevitably, watching this movie over the course of the 3-hour runtime where you're really into something happening and then it cuts to something else. And you're kind of like, oh, I wanted to see where that was going. I mean, you could wait 5 minutes, but that's not everybody can handle that. I understand. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, cinema, it's about editing. It's about building momentum. It's about propulsion. Of course it is. I do think this movie, considering the gargantuan task it sets for itself, succeeds more often than it fails in terms of editing these stories together and weaving these stories together, which I think in itself is a huge accomplishment. I think this movie, and part of the reason it resonates with me and why I kind of champion this movie, is that it is a movie that risks being silly, that risks being made fun of. I mean, this is a movie with, I think it's in the 50s on Metacritic. I don't know what it's in on Rotten Tomatoes. It's probably like 60 or something, or somewhere in that range. It got very mixed reviews. There are a handful of people that like absolutely love it. Like, this is a movie with like a real cult following, but there are a lot of people that just were not about this movie when it came out. And not even just for kind of the race stuff that we've alluded to. I mean, just for more generally, it just did not work for them, I think, for some of the reasons Kirk said. And I can respect that opinion, because this is a movie that risks that reaction. It's a movie that genuinely takes risks in terms of its narrative structure, in terms of its ambition, in terms of its earnest kind of cheesiness at times. The big emotional payoff you're going to wait for this movie is the line, "What is an ocean but a multitude of drops?" And you're either going to be someone who rolls their eyes at that and says, "That's so stupid, that's from a Hallmark card," or you're going to cry when you hear that line, like I do every time. That always hits me. And I think that what works for me about that moment and about that story is the Jim Broadbent. Is that him?
Jim Sturgis.
Oh no, Jim Broadbent's the old guy. Yeah, Jim's. I'll edit this together very smoothly.
You mean Ewing, the lawyer on board ship?
Yes.
Yeah.
His performance, I think, is a very, very earnest, very like naked quality to it. There's such a gee whiz. His eyes are so wide in that moment, and when he says he wants to be an abolitionist, and it's just like, it almost feels like he, the character, hasn't really thought through what that will mean or the risks it entails, or like even really understands the full context. But he knows in his heart that that's what is his duty. He knows in his heart that that's the right thing to do. And that's what carries it forward with me. It means knowing, despite every rational reason to not do something, it means that even though it's going to hurt you or even kill you, even though it's going to ruin your life, that there are certain things you just have to do, right? And that's, I think, what the movie's kind of about. I do think that's partly why I find the 2012 story so underwhelming. The present day story in the nursing home as the comic relief story, is it seems like, why would you not want your present day story to be the most urgent? Or maybe it just seems kind of counterintuitive to make that the comic relief story, especially when the comedy, and again, it's subjective, but the broadness of that kind of slapstick just doesn't really do anything for me. My favorite is probably the 2144 kind of sci-fi story, kind of the dystopian revolutionary. That's the one that kind of gets my blood pumping, and that I think is kind of the core of the movie emotionally. I mean, maybe not. I mean, the core of the movie emotionally is whatever resonates with you emotionally. But anyway, I admire this movie for its ambition, for its courage, and for its heart. You know, I mean, that sounds like a pull quote from Detroit Fox TV on the box of college, the movie where Raven Simone has to visit colleges with her dad or something. But you know, but I do feel the heart in this movie, and I feel it in that willingness to be cheesy, that willingness to be seen as stupid, which I do think is a through line actually in the Wachowski's work. And it may or may not work for you in any given time. I certainly didn't like Jupiter Ascending. We've had the Jupiter Ascending poster in our dorm room, so we know all about that film. But this is a movie where it works for me unironically. So there's so many places to go with this movie because there's all the plot lines. I don't think we're going to discuss all 6 in detail because that would be an episode as long as the movie itself. But why don't we start actually with the makeup and talking about that a little bit? And maybe that's not the most fruitful round, but I think it's important to discuss it because it is a thing that you are going to notice watching the movie. I agree in the sense that it is not the best makeup I've ever seen. It's not great makeup. I think it's kind of inconsistent. I think there are some people who look kind of okay, and there are some that look really off. But why don't we start with, or whoever wants to jump in on that. Anthony, how do you engage with that aspect of the movie? Does it just work for you, or does it take you out of the movie, or like what, just a visceral level watching the movie, how do you react to the makeup and some of the choices they make?
All right. Well, 2 things. First, I was wondering if, do you think Armin White would defend the makeup as a part of like the minstrel tradition of movie and music culture? Popped in my head. Yes, right.
No,
but 2, okay, so some of them is really bad. Jim Sturgis as like the Asian man in the sort of sci-fi future just looks grotesque and awful. It just doesn't seem right. But it's funny because the movie has a fundamental problem, and this is me thinking about the makeup thematically. The movie has a fundamental problem, which is that the movie wants to be about humanity, and to a certain extent wants to be about humanity through reincarnation, which is something similar, as Kirk reminds us, of what I Origins does. And now I Origins alludes to reincarnation of the love of the main character's life, right? But reincarnated through a sort of young girl in India. And it does a kind of switcheroo there. But in keeping the same actors and keeping the same actresses in Cloud Atlas, the reincarnation runs into a problem in that they want us to know that these are the people. They want us to know that these are still the same people throughout history and time. And there becomes a problem of they're the same people, yet different races, different cultures, different identities. And so the movie seems to suggest that we're all humanity at the end of the day. We're all humans at the end of the day. But it wants to bypass a whole step of individualistic and cultural level that it doesn't really successfully handle, I think, with the makeup, which is how I feel about that issue.
Bypass the step in what sense?
It wants to bypass the step in it because it wants to keep the same people itself. It never gives us the transformation aspect, whereas I Origins actually shows us a change through a literal difference of people. Keeping the same people in Cloud Atlas, it bypasses the step of learning, bypasses a step of seeing these people become new people at the end of the day. It's actually, I think, a very cynical movie at times, that we're all the same in different places and different past.
It's almost like you're saying, like it's like different it's happening in different worlds, right? Almost. Yeah, like you don't get the feeling that this is like this reverberant like thing that, I don't know, maybe I can hear that too. I just wanted to add, I think probably my best example is when Halle Berry and Keith David, right, are like engaging in that chase in San Francisco in the 70s timeline. And if I'm not mistaken, they go into like a sweatshop, and isn't the kind of the overseer, whatever, the middleman, the boss, that's Bayduna, right? That's the Sanni, right? Am I wrong?
I believe so.
That was the most egregious example of makeup. It's like, really? She looks like she got stung by 1,000 bees, and and I don't know. It's just, that one was hard to swallow. That was the final straw. But I think it kind of, for me, the whole makeup thing, it just goes back to the idea of everything's overproduced in this film. and there's no room for like genuine emotion in the acting. Like when do we have what feels like an organic experience in this film? Like the closest thing, he was on the Edinburgh Tower, some sort of tower. He goes there every morning. This is the pianist who writes the Cloud Atlas Sextet, and he's a closeted gay lover and repressive 40s England
1930s.
1930s, and his lover shows up. And I thought there was going to be this great like Sleepless in Seattle at the top of the Empire State Building moment, and he like hides from them and he just runs away. It's like, okay, man, they're almost like I did feel something right there when that happened, when he showed up, and then it was gone. And it's like, and then he killed himself, and he's like, I'll see you in another life under the Corsican stars. And I don't know if they tied that back. Like those two, I don't remember those two actors meeting in any other timeline, but maybe that's the next level, is like, well, maybe they did. Maybe he's Bayduna and the other one's Tom Hanks. But then it's like, why do you use the same actors? Which Anthony is saying. It's like, what is the point of that? It just feels very on the nose. You could have just told these stories and then kind of in a nuanced way inferred that they're the same or similar people, or I don't know, maybe that's just kind of like a device that is necessary in this type of film. How like it's more common in stage, where we just take some things because it's a movie or it's a play, and it's like it has to be this way. But
well, when you say there, to go back a step, you said that there's no scene of genuine emotion in this movie, and that's like the closest it comes. That's a subjective assessment, right? I mean, because I certainly felt emotion in that moment, and I kind of prefer it playing out the way it does. And there's a handful of moments that I very much feel. I mean,
subjectivity,
genuine emotion, as opposed to cynical manufactured emotion, or
subjectivity is implied, but I feel like it was trying to have an emotional response to a movie trailer. Like it's just too short. Everything's too short. Everything's too overproduced, and all the lines, it feels like none of the lines felt really organic or mimetic. Maybe the closest it came was the after the fall, the like neo, I don't know what you'd even call it. What times it's like a regression, post-apocalyptic, but at the same time like primal Tom Hanks, Halle Berry companionship.
Max
like
told, yeah.
Basically like humanity's become like hunter-gatherers again after presumably a climate apocalypse, right? So,
and it was only maybe because they were speaking in such a strange dialect that it felt more organic. Like maybe if Tom Hanks had just been talking like he had in all the other ones, that I wouldn't have been as impressed. Anyways, I can ramble on, so go cut me off. I'm sorry.
But I mean, no, I like what Kirk was saying, and here's where he hits upon the genius of it all: theatricality, right? I think the artificiality that Kirk is pointing to is there and is intentional. We want to notice. We want to, in fact, notice. Wait, that Chinese guy is actually Halle Berry, right? They want you to notice that. They want you to say ooh ah. They want you to say wow. Look at the acting, sure. But they also want you, they're calling attention to the fictionality, the mere fancifulness of these stories that you are seeing before your eyes. These are merely plays, okay? We are merely players in this life, I think is the idea. So often, like, for instance, I don't think there's actually like a theme of reincarnation in this movie. I didn't see that. That's how I heard the movie described to me, that it was like it's about like reincarnations of souls. I mean, there's a little bit of that, definitely, like when Ben Wishaw's character like thematizes the whole thing with the thing of Cloud Atlas. He talks about how like you and I met so many times before, but that doesn't really, we don't actually see that. This is kind of a theme that floats around, but I don't think it's literally trying to, like, at no point is the reincarnation of people the whole story of Cloud Atlas, right? It really is just these 6 stories that have these little connections that are designed to make them feel coherent. And one of those connections are like the actors kind of cast sort of at random, right, into these different roles. And I think to me, it's kind of brilliant. To me, it's really cool. I mean, obviously it feels so like, from the perspective of 2021, it feels so like egregious and kind of deliberate, that like, there's no way they're doing this like just ignorantly. They must have a really good point, of course. Now, I think just in 2012, they were just a little bit less sensitive to these issues than we are now, or than people would be like even a year later. But, there's something about it I think is cool. Wait.
Connor, you want to walk that one back? Or
That's
take that again?
Teaser.
I think
it's
kind of cool. So let me give you, at Gallatin, for instance, we read this, or we studied this author, Anna Devere Smith, whose whole thing, she made like a play or a theater piece called Fires in the Mirror. And she basically would dress up in different outfits. She would kind of intentionally play these kind of exaggerated versions of different ethnicities, of different types of people. Often they'd be very specific people, but often they would also be played as kind of broad ethnic stereotypes, right? And she would try to tell the story of each, perspective on a particular kind of conflict in New York City through the eyes of these different, characters, all of whom are of different racial groups or what have you, right? Or different identities. She would play men, she would play women, etc., right? And that was supposed to be, for her, that was a kind of liberatory thing, right? That it was supposed to allow us to recognize that our differences are mere gestus, are mere roles that we play, right? That we can doff should we choose, and therefore we have a sort of lighter view of things, and we see ourselves as more neutral human beings in our common humanity, is the idea. Now, I think it is kind of laughable now. I mean, I'm kind of amazed that we read that and we didn't all, like, I think some of us critiqued it at the time, but yeah, I think it's kind of out the window, but I kind of like the idea of it. I don't think it's completely defensible. The other problem with that too is like this idea of having the different actors. I like the idea of this kind of troupe of actors, and the actors tend to play similar characters in different parts. So for instance, in different stories, so Hugo Weaving will play the big bad hitman in one and the big bad dad in another, right? So they're kind of playing to their strengths, and the Saw Me character will play this kind of damsel lover character in different moments as well, or oppressed woman characters. They tend to play actually the same kinds of characters, not different kinds of characters for the most part, which is kind of interesting. And I think it's emphasizing, again, the fact of roles. I mean, these roles could be overthrown, but typically they're placed into these roles. Maybe that's more for expediency than anything else. It doesn't go quite to the extent that it's going to throw out its aesthetic qualities. It wants all of these stories to be more or less unobtrusive. They just want you to notice along the way, okay, I've seen this character, seen this actor before. I wouldn't have expected her in this story, but I can see that this is all a play. This is all, a sort of a fiction that we're seeing. And I think there's value in that. I think there's something very interesting about that. And I think there's other moments. I think every single story alludes to itself as being fictional in the universes of the other people. So of the other stories. So anyway, that's my spiel. Sorry.
No, Connor, you put that very well. I couldn't have put it like that, but I think the fictionality is correct. There's something fundamentally about it. And I think that's why it is not just simply about reincarnation. It's about stories or artifacts. These things kind of are echoed through time and refract through time. The biggest example I can think of is with the Sanmi character, who in this post-apocalyptic landscape in the final story, or chronologically, is worshipped as a god by these tribal people that are still on Earth. And Halle Berry, who's like an off-worlder and who is more technologically developed and more knowledgeable about the history, tells him that she was not, in fact, a god. So it's sort of these ideas that are kind of bounce around in history and change and are not always the most reliable. And I think there's very important theme of roles, as you say as well. Like the idea of roles and the idea of this theatricality and everyone playing a different kind of role, and the idea of transcending that role or breaking that role, and the difficulty of doing that, the tremendous difficulty of doing that, and the idea of identity as well. And I think that what's funny is this is a movie that is like, you could never make today, right? It's like the Tropic Thunder thing. It was like, that was the very last moment you could have made that movie. 2012 was the very last moment culturally we could have made Cloud Atlas, at least in the version that we have. We could have gotten another movie based on the book, but it wouldn't have been like this, right? But I do think that this movie substantively is incredibly like progressive, is incredibly broad-minded, incredibly liberal, right? You know, and it's all about helping out oppressed people. It's all about lifting up oppressed people. You know, that's the entire theme of the movie. And I think the idea of like these identity categories are things to be escaped, to be transcended. And now maybe that's not possible within our lifetimes or with the society we currently have, but the movie's about paving a way to a world, paving a way to a future, or we can lose these categories. I think should be any, you know, progressive person's goal in the long term. But I don't find it to be deeply morally problematic, you know, watching it today.
Doesn't it feel progressive in the sense of like a Cuomo progressive rather than like an Ilhan Omar progressive? Like, it's like, we should help those Black folk, you know, we should help them get free. We really should. And then we'll go home and watch Green Book. You know, we should help these replicants or help these people. It's like, well, you know, a lot of liberation theology and philosophy is about putting those groups in positions where they can affect change themselves. So that, and Anthony, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? I'm just curious.
Well, I kind of like to take that position. I like Connor's idea, but let me take Kirk's position a little and mix it with my own on the theme of reincarnation as well, which is the one I think in the question of earnestness and experience and the effort of the film to try to tell a story that's about humanity helping each other or humanity helping humanity. I think we're constantly seeing characters and people run up against the limitations of what it means to connect, what it means to actually connect on a deep level where you could truly understand one another. I think one of the things that happens with that abolitionist scene, which is so on the nose, is we're supposed to feel a little bit circumspect about it. I think Kirk's right on that, where the progressiveness of that scene should feel a little off to us because it almost feels like a fiction. Just as when Ben Wishaw's character thinks he could connect with the composer in a moment of gay musician to gay musician, he becomes ridiculed. The composer actually threatens him with his own sort of lifestyle. The other key moment for, I'm not going to remember any of the characters' names, so I'm just going to say the actors, but Ian Holm, when he comes to the kind of place where he remembers possibly almost losing his virginity, he sees the girl he loved young, now grown old. And it becomes this kind of sad, wistful moment for him. Not that old. It's still Susan Sarandon, right? But the other moment too is Tom Hanks in Seeing as a Scientist, when he sees Halle Berry in San Francisco of '73. He finally has this realization of love only to be destroyed or blown up. And what we get is this deep longing for connection across temporality, across spatiality, across different historical events. And what the movie wants to suggest, I think, is the effort for humanity to find one another, despite a kind of possible ruin that we all seem to be laying forward for each other. And I think that sort of logic holds within it a sort of phoniness to it, a sort of suspect nature about it that I think Kirk gets at in his kind of call of it being a Cuomo progressiveness versus an Ilhan Omar progressiveness. That would be my thought on the matter anyway.
So, sorry, a phoniness, how a phoniness?
I think if I understood Kirk right, in the sense of that it wants us to, how do I put it? It wants us to assume the lesson of a sort of universality that we could understand one another through a kind of simple facade of the way these actors can inhabit one role to another, that they could play into the fictionality or the kind of costumeness of our differences.
Oh, also, Ian Holm is not in this movie. There's no Bilbo Baggins. It's Jim Broadbent.
Yes,
Professor Slughorn from Harry Potter, if you remember.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Sorry. Okay, easy to mix up. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it's definitely the boldest move the movie makes. I think even more than the narrative structure. I think if this movie were structured and written exactly the same, but didn't make that aesthetic choice to have the same actors, the same handful of actors in every story, it probably would have gone over better with more people. So it takes this risk to make this kind of statement that may or may not work for you. It's a very divisive move. I mean, I do wonder what that hypothetical other film would have been like, because I do think if you'd sanded off the goofiness a little bit, maybe some of these themes would have resonated more. I don't know, because in some ways, because it's a weird thing watching this movie, because at its best moments, like the climactic moments of the movie, like I think it reaches this, I do think it is like a symphony. Like I think that is an intentional thing that they're going for, that move, like the different parts kind of coming together in these like emotional climaxes. And when it crests at those moments, it just nails it in a way I don't think too many other movies can do for me. And honestly, Kirk is going to commit seppuku when I say this, but there are times when it reminds me of Inception, the cutting between the dream levels, and those like he's doing it right now. He's grabbing the knife, and those climaxes hitting at the same moment. And I think, like with the final battle and the the sci-fi one, like the Blade Runner kind of one, like I love it. And I love the way everything's kind of coming up. And I think that the structuring the movie in this way gives that moment, because I think that if you had just made this, like say a TV show with each episode being its own story, each one's like a, half hour or whatever, it may have been good. But I think that weaving them together in this way gives those moments have a greater sense of resonance and a sense of significance, a sense of importance. But at the same time, I do wonder if the choice to utilize these same several actors makes the world feel smaller rather than bigger. The theatricality of that, I think, can detract as much as it enhances. So I am ultimately kind of ambivalent, which is weird to say about such a fundamental aspect of the movie, but I think it's a kind of a troubling and interesting aspect of the movie as well. Did you guys have more thoughts on that, or do you want to move on to another topic?
Well, kind of related. I mean, there's a lot of things going on at once there. Yeah, I'll stand by my point that I kind of dig that idea of the troupe of actors. Yes, I agree. I would have to admit that it's taking the position that Kirk described as the Cuomo position, that it's a kind of racial abolitionist, and sort of colorblind, perspective, right? That is complex, and I don't want to. I think is maybe reductive and not necessarily instructive for political action in our world.
Connor, can I defend this real quick? Can I just touch?
Sure.
Because I literally didn't understand the criticism until you just articulated it for me. So, okay. I think that just to reinforce what I was saying, this is a utopian long-term goal. I understand that is not the colorblind thing. I think that's what the movie's saying, is that throughout time, throughout centuries, we can rid ourselves of these things. Anyway, that's why I don't think it's Cuomo. I think calling it Cuomo progressive is a little bit unfair. Anyway.
No, and I would ultimately agree, right? Though I see the problems with it, I would think that's pretty key, right? We have to have that kind of as the goal in mind. Truly a colorblind, world, right? Has to be some kind of ideal like placed before us, but I can see why there's lots of problems with that in the present. But anyway, I think I like the element of the actors, and I just want to call attention to one thing you could say about it is that one thing you'd be annoyed by, and did kind of annoy me, is that like you're taking these roles away that could have been all these other actors, could have played these nice little roles or had their big break, playing opposite Tom Hanks, but like, no, it has to be Halle Berry again, or it has to be, this person. So it's kind of funny in its way. Like they could have expanded the roster, but there's something intentional about having that cast. And maybe again, it's cynical. It's so that we can have these big names in every scene, right? Even when they're playing bit parts, maybe there's something appealing about that. But I just want to mention too, this idea of like, there's the one case of a movie within a movie that is never, or of a story within a story, we never see really in its entirety. Well, we do see it in its entirety. It's a tiny like YouTube video of like that they watch in the future world, the dystopian future, but not the post-apocalyptic future, where the replicants see only a clip of this thing and they watch it over and over again, and they're fascinated, and they can watch it over and over again, just this single clip, this kind of out of context piece, right? And then we see they're led out of their self-imposed, or sort of their Plato's cave, so to speak, again, very Wachowski, Matrix like. They escape from that prison and are out in freedom now, and she's able to watch the entire clip, right? And somehow that's obviously metafictional about like seeing these things kind of out of context, and eventually we'll get to the end of the story. And there's something kind of interesting about that. One more thing. I have one other parting comment, but I don't want to just hog the mic here. So there's something too that's kind of weird about, okay, not just like the racial politics of like, you know, Halle Berry playing an old Chinese guy. I remember at the time that was quite celebrated. I don't know. For some reason, I thought people were talking a lot about that, like saying about how cool that was. So anyway, you know, ask weird questions. We have interesting combinations, not just, you know, white people playing, you know, people of color, right? Which is kind of our traditionally, you know, and obviously problematic, you know, practice that we've had in Hollywood for a long time and stuff. But there's something weird about, for instance, the Pacific Islanders, right? They're apparently Pacific Islanders, but they're played mostly by like Black men. I feel like they're coded as kind of African, and they're enslaved too. So there's this kind of like collapsing of like Pacific Islanders and Africans together into one, into like, you know, like the African American experience like into one, which is kind of weird. And it's, I think maybe intentional again, is trying to just say that the other is the same no matter where you are. It's essentially the same. All others are equally the same in the eyes of the white man or something, like, you know, it's trying to level out this thing, but it is kind of problematic and kind of weird in its way. It's kind of quaint and odd. And there's the odd fact that everyone in the future, except for like a couple people, must be Asian. It kind of doesn't make any sense. But then after that, there's no Asians at all. They're all gone. Well, I think maybe there are a few in the future with Tom Hanks, where it seems that, again, humanity is divided into racial groups, so that the valley people are mostly white and the people on the ship are mostly Black. So anyways, there's really weird, you know, moves. I kind of like it, but again, it's like, it deserves some pondering on, and I'm sure someone who, you know, wants to could obviously sharpen their knives on any of these things and really tear this movie apart on its, you know, retrograde, you know, depictions and whatnot. But I think all these things have pendants. The pendants to all those issues of representation. I think there are kind of, you know, points to be made about its progressive stances in those cases, but it's curious. I'll say that much.
I don't know if I read like a racially insensitive thing in like one of those books that's in Skyrim, I would feel like this wasn't necessary. And I guess that's how I feel in this film, because I don't feel like it's a great piece of art. So like you look at Infinite Jest, and there's this, you know, there's some elements there that, you know, written by a white guy that, you know, are a little bit iffy.
It's like the chapter that's written from the perspective of like the homeless guy, the junkie.
I don't think that one.
The P-Goat chapter.
Which one, Anthony?
The P-Goat chapter, the one from Joelle.
I believe it's like very
her, like,
kind
father.
of broken English, kind of, or like it's not broken. It's just like
Winona
there's a lot of
Cry or something.
Yeah, that one.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Anyways, but that's like, you know, that's Infinite Jest. This is Cloud Atlas. That's my point, I guess. But anyways, I did feel like I was gonna say one more thing, but you know, I forgot it. So maybe I'll think of it in the wrap up. But anyways, I just wanted to jump in there.
Okay, well, I think we're kind of winding down. That's okay. I do feel it's unfortunate. Well, I didn't want to spend this much time talking about this aspect of the movie. I mean, it is something that needs to be talked about. I think it is important. It is interesting to watching it through a modern lens about that. But I mean, maybe we should just go to final thoughts. I mean, I don't have like a clear thread short of like going through the individual stories, which I don't think would be a productive use of time. So if you want, you guys can have final thoughts and we can kind of try to tie it all together.
But I will say, like, on the topic of like how this movie can ever get made, because 3 years later, or no, let's see, what is this? 8 years later, this movie would be like on FX, like on Hulu, like online only, like 15 episodes. But like the real question of like the cultural insensitivity of things right here lies in Tom Hanks, because 4 years later, like the idea that Tom Hanks would be in like a huge big budget movie like this without like a huge array of different like discussions, controversies, and voices about him in this movie is really fascinating to me, especially because at this point he's still somewhat of a beloved like actor like across the nation, and like it's all gone like just a few years later. So like it's also something to keep in mind.
Wait, that's gone? I feel like he's the one remaining guy.
No, he's
He,
like
like,
a huge
survived
thing
Me
though.
Too.
Like,
The
but like
Q
he's a
people, like,
QAnon.
the
Yeah,
Trump
he's not like
people hate
a
him.
yeah.
Wait, what is this about QAnon?
They hate him. They think he's like an evil Hollywood pedophile.
Oh, so you're saying like, okay, I was talking more in like kind of our circles. Okay.
Most people like him in general, I would say, for sure. But there's a contingency of the country that doesn't like him. Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's got to play JFK Jr. then, and then they'll like him again.
No, you show them the clip of him saying the N-word in this movie, and they'll be like, "Oh, okay, he's not that."
Well, I would say that when he gets to play his gruff, I liked, again, theatricality, playing the gruff, completely evil, ship surgeon or whatever. I don't know. It was a nice little turn for him.
I love him as the author. The author. I'm sorry, I didn't want to, like, you can keep going. I was throwing that.
He's the author, but he's the one who poisons him.
Australian author, like throws the guy out the window.
No, I'm talking about in the.
No. I would never mind. I know what you.
Oh no, I think he's an Irish settler. I don't think he's Australian. Maybe I missed something. He's implied to be a pikey, if I'm allowed to say that term. I apologize to all of our Shetla listeners. Yeah,
I thought that was worst part, honestly. That accent was really sad.
Terrible. It was truly hard to watch. But anyway, they can't all be winners. But I wish they had chosen. I'm sure Hugo Weaving could have given that a better shot. He's quite a good accent guy. So,
well, I think we've answered the question. Tom Hanks is very good. So without further ado, oh boy, this is gonna be an interesting one to edit, guys. All right, Cloud Atlas. I think we can do final thoughts now. I think we've kind of aired out our feelings in general about the film. Why don't we just do the order we started with? Or actually, no, I'm gonna start with Kirk. Why don't you vote on it?
Tony, I wondered. I didn't think you would let me take a dump on the ending like you were about to. But Tony, if you had pitched this as a meme, somewhat similarly to how I pitched iOrigins, I would have been so much more on board.
You love iOrigins, Kirk. Don't pull that with me.
No, but here's the thing. I was willing to admit it was very silly. And I came into this film and you had said you cried at the end, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to like really be emotionally invested in the film. That it hasn't really happened for me in a while. And it just was a dud. And it was almost like, for you video game nerds out there, it was like plopping in No Man's Sky, and you turn it on and you realize everything you've been told is a lie. But it's about expectations, really. And it's also about, like I said, the temporality of it all, and like my mood today and how I'm feeling, how cynical or optimistic I am. Like, what's my worldview today? So, on this day, I thought it was a steaming pile of shit, but that doesn't mean it is. And that doesn't mean I'll feel that way forever. On a rewatch, I could actually find the merit in it. And I do think it's really ambitious. And I would never say this movie shouldn't have been made, because it definitely should have been. But it's just a no for me.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll do Anthony, I guess.
All right. So I think I'm somewhat a little less positive than when I first started. I still actually, though, I'm closer to Tony than Kirk, I think. I think I still find there enough in this movie to kind of resonate with me. Where most of my fallback has kind of happened is actually with thinking about the movie through the theatricality lens, which I love as a reading, but as an experience and as something to take from the movie, leaves me kind of with too many criticisms of the kind that Kirk was throwing out. I definitely see his side of it more. I definitely see some of the cheesiness of it, though that doesn't bother me either. So I'm going to give it in a Kirk fashion, a soft yes.
All right, Connor, they plated it up for you. They served it up for you. A nice big juicy burger. He's sitting in the seat of power. So what will he do?
I was angling for this, Tony. I was trying to keep my opinion masked until this moment. Well, Tony, I would say this is a great entry into the annals of the anthology film. Still not quite as good as its basic equivalent, which is D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, which has similar choices of actors, let's say, some kind of costume and wardrobe and makeup choices as this one, but tells basically exactly the same story. But no, I found it interesting in that respect. What I'm saying is that I don't find it particularly original or groundbreaking. I just find it technically proficient. And I just didn't have the spark of emotion that Tony felt, and I wish I had. In which case, I could have, I obviously I admired each of the stories. They're well told and elegantly told within the time allotted, but it didn't mean much more to me than that. I find this actually movie pretty cool as a cultural artifact on the level of what we're talking about. Again, the kind of I don't mind the makeup. I don't mind the costumery. I think that's kind of interesting. I think we deserve to be able to talk about it and sort of muse about it and not simply, take a hard perspective of love or, castigate. Doesn't have to be binary. But ultimately, I found there was not that much. I didn't have that much to give. At no point did I feel that it's like claimed so like theme really like resonated or expanded beyond the kind of the individual stories. Okay. So I'm going to say no. Soft no.
All right. Thank you, Connor. That was a very, very well-developed argument. I will say that I probably could have done a better job explaining why I love this movie. I won't go on for too long, but I'll say that, watching this movie for the first time, and I think I was in college. I think it was like probably like 20 when I saw it, probably like a year or two after it had come out. And it like reminded me of like watching movies as a kid, like watching Star Wars as a kid or something, and like you get so swept up in movies and so excited and so invested at that age. And as you get older and you watch more movies, that happens less. And I think that this movie's structural gimmickry, I'll say, not in a negative way, but in its kind of its novel construction of its plot and its kind of symphonic construction and editing, it was able to return me to that place of being a child. It was able to take me back to that feeling of watching Star Wars, of feeling those feelings again, because I feel like the people that made this movie did so, and this is not a very academic or back upable criticism, but this is something that I do feel powerfully, is that they made this with sincerity, they made this with passion, they made this with love. And I think the sentiments, as hippy dippy and new agey as they may seem, are sincere sentiments. There is a truth to it in the way that the movie Interstellar, which is just an okay movie, I like it far less than this, but the scene with the idea of like love transcending time or whatever. Now, maybe that's a really goofy, silly idea, but if that idea resonates with you, if you believe that idea on some level, then that moment is going to speak to you. And I think that's how I feel about this movie, because the ideas in this movie do speak to me. They do resonate with me. I do watch this movie and feel like I should be a better person. I feel like I need to challenge myself. I need to transcend my role. I need to transcend my station. I need to help other people. How can I do that? And it takes a lot for a movie to make me think in that way, to kind of shake me out of my complacency in that way, and to speak to me on that kind of that moral and on that emotional level. So that's why I like the movie. We should vote again now that you've heard. No, no, it's all right.
Let me just say, can I say one thing, Tony? I take umbrage with the idea that if these ideas or themes speak to you, then the movie should speak to you. I loved Interstellar, and I love these general themes of universality when they're done well, and love transcending when they're done well and tactfully. So to me, it was the execution that ultimately fell short. Anyways, that's my opinion.
It is what it is. Cloud Atlas is unfortunately not sitting next to Sorcerer on the Mount Rushmore, the big Mount Rushmore we've developed, and that's okay. So this is episode 75, which is sort of a special occasion. So Kirk has a very well-developed idea for something we're going to do to commemorate this. I'll let him explain it.
Yeah, so we try to make every 25 episodes stand out, right? For our fans. Of course, we have the weekly Patreon updates, and then we have the OnlyFans picks that we release every Tuesday. Tony was a little late this week. He's been battling some hemorrhoids, and so that obviously is interdicts any sort of picture. But we will be
Tuesday night Fortnite streams.
We will be introducing a new idea, a new gimmick that we hope you'll love. It's the idea that we pride ourselves here at the 706. At least you three do. I'm just some guy who watches the movies occasionally, but you guys have such a vast knowledge of cinema outside of the 21st century. So we're going to try to mix it up, and every week each of our nominations has to come from a different decade of film. And so the person who gets to go first can claim a decade, and so on and so forth. Shenanigans will result. There will be backstabbing, there will be guffaws and everything else, and we'll have fun with it, but hoping to just kind of like this movie, realize that our crimes and our kindness reverberate through the past and into the future, right, Tony?
Yes, Kirk. I also want to thank our fans for the many letters and comments I've received about my medical issue that I won't repeat. But rest assured, next Tuesday you can expect your classic Tony picks. I've got some good ones saved up on my hard drive. So next week, or next whenever we do this, will be Once Upon a Time in the West, hosted by Anthony. So we will see if his recent life changes will affect his viewing of this film, whether it'll ruin it for him or bring it to greater heights. Do you have anything to say, Anthony?
I'll have what she's having.